I'll never forget the sight that greeted me when I returned from the hardware store that Saturday afternoon. Our moving truck sat half unloaded in the driveway, but something was terribly wrong. Boxes that had been neatly stacked were now scattered across our lawn like someone had kicked over, and until several were split open, their contents spilled out onto the grass. My grandmother's china lay in pieces. Photo albums were scattered in the dirt, and there, standing in the middle of the chaos with her arms crossed and a smug smile plastered across her face, was Karen, the hall president. Behind her, my husband Michael stood silently, his phone in his hand, his expression completely unreadable. I had no idea at that moment that this woman had just made the biggest mistake of her entitled life. We'd only moved to Willowbrook Estates 3 days earlier. The neighborhood was everything we'd wanted after years of apartment living, tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, and what the realtor had called a very active homeowners association. I should have paid more attention to the way she'd said active with that slight grimace. From the moment our moving truck pulled up, I'd noticed the woman across the street watching us from her porch. She had that particular look of someone who considered herself the unofficial sheriff of the subdivision, bleached blonde hair and a severe bob designer athleisure that had never seen actual athletic activity, and eyes that seemed to catalog every minor infraction against her personal code of neighborhood conduct. The first warning came within hours of our arrival. I was carrying boxes from the truck when she marched across the street, not bothering with any pleasantries like welcome to the neighborhood. Instead, she thrust a printed paper at me. Moving vehicles may not remain on the property for more than 24 hours, she announced. I explained we just arrived and would need the weekend to unload. She pursed her lips like I'd suggested burning down the community center. 24 hours, she repeated, tapping the paper. I'm Karen Henderson, HOA president, and we have standards here. Michael had come out, then introduced himself politely and assured her we'd have everything unloaded as quickly as possible. She'd looked him up and down, sniffed, and marched back to her house. The next morning, I found a bright orange violation notice tucked under our doormat. Boxes visible from street. 12-hour correction period. I'd left a few boxes on the porch overnight, planning to bring them in first thing. Apparently, first thing wasn't early enough for Karen. When Michael saw it, he just smiled. That particular smile, I'd learned it meant he was filing something away for later. He's got an incredible memory for details. My husband comes with the job. I suppose by noon she was back, this time citing us for the moving truck's position to and over the sidewalk line. Apparently then came a complaint about the volume of our conversation as we carried furniture, disrupting the peace at p.m. on a Friday. Saturday morning started peacefully enough. Michael had gone to his new office to set up his computer, and I was making good progress on the unpacking. I needed more shelf brackets, so I made a quick run to the hardware store. I was gone maybe 45 minutes. When I returned, I found the war zone I described earlier. Karen stood among our destroyed belongings like a general surveying a conquered battlefield. These boxes were in violation of HOA Code 7.3, she announced. When she saw me, temporary structures may not be erected on front lawns. I stared at her, trying to process what I was seeing. You knocked over our boxes? I asked, still not quite believing it. I rectified the violation, she corrected with that smug smile. Perhaps next time you'll read the HOA guidelines before moving into a respectable neighborhood. That's when I noticed Michael. He was standing by our front door, his phone held at an angle I recognized from years of watching him prep for court. He was recording everything. Karen, however, was too busy lecturing me about property values and the importance of maintaining standards to notice. Do you have any idea what this has done to our belongings? I asked, kneeling to gather the scattered photos. Your belongings should have been properly stored, she sniffed. I've documented everything for the HOA board. There will be fines of course, excessive clutter, temporary structures, and failure to comply with forward. Then his prosecutor voice, calm and professional. Ma'am, did you just admit to intentionally damaging our property? Karen spun around, noticing him for the first time. And you are? She demanded. Michael Chen, he replied, the homeowner and an assistant district attorney. The change in Karen's demeanor was instant, but not in the way you might expect. Instead of backing down, She puffed up even more. I don't care if you're the president, she spat. In this neighborhood, I'm the law. The HOA board will hear about your threats. Michael asked mildly. I simply asked if you damaged our property, which you did on video after admitting to it verbally. That's destruction of property, trespassing, and harassment. Karen laughed. Actually laughed. Good luck proving anything. I was enforcing HOA regulations. We'll see what the real police think when you call 911 over some cardboard boxes. Michael smiled again, that dangerous prosecutor smile, who said anything about cardboard boxes. You destroyed family heirlooms, electronic equipment, and personal documents. The value exceeds $2,000, making this a felony for the first time. Uncertainty flickered across Karen's face. You can't prove the value, she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. Michael gestured to our neighbor Jim, who I now noticed had been watching from his yard. Jim was already walking over with his own phone out. Got the whole thing on video, Jim called out. Saw her throwing boxes around like a tornado. Been waiting for someone to stand up to her nonsense. Karen's face went from red to white. This is a setup, she sputtered. You're all conspiring against me. No conspiracy needed, Michael said, pulling out his phone. Just documenting a crime. He dialed 911, putting it on speaker. 911, what's your emergency? We need to report destruction of property and harassment at 472 Willowbrook Drive, Michael said calmly. The perpetrator is still on scene. We have video evidence and witnesses. Karen tried to leave then, but Michael stepped into her path. You need to remain here until the police arrive, he said. Leaving the scene of a crime you've admitted to committing would be inadvisable. You can't make me stay, she shrieked. I know my rights. You should, Michael agreed. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you exercise it. The police arrived within 10 minutes. Two officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else until Michael introduced himself and showed them the videos. Their demeanor shifted immediately. The older officer turned to Karen with barely concealed satisfaction. Mrs. Henderson, we've had numerous complaints about you harassing neighbors. Looks like you finally picked the wrong one. As they took her statement, Karen's story kept changing. First, the boxes had fallen over naturally, then she'd knocked them over accidentally while inspecting for violations. Finally, she circled back to claiming she had the authority as HOA president. The officers weren't buying any of it. The younger officer examined the damaged items, taking photos and notes. Ma'am, this appears to be several thousand in damages, he said. That's felony territory. Karen's lawyer mode kicked in then. Sir, she screeched, this is harassment. I'll have your badges. The older officer just sighed. Ma'am, turn around and put your hands behind your back. The look on Karen's face as the handcuffs clicked shut was priceless. A correction notice as Michael's tepid crowd had gathered by the neighbors who'd suffered under Karen's reign of terror for years. As they led her to the squad car, Karen kept shouting about HOA regulations and her authority. The officers just guided her into the back seat, her protests muffled by the closed door. Michael turned to me, his expression softening. You okay? He asked. I nodded, still processing what had just happened. Our belongings were still scattered across the lawn, but somehow that seemed less important now. The older officer approached us. We'll need you to come down and file a formal report, he said. Given the value of damages and the evidence, the prosecutor's office will likely pursue charges. Michael nodded. I'll be handling this personally, he said. The officer grinned. Bet you will. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal procedures that Michael navigated with practiced ease. Karen hired an expensive lawyer who tried every trick to get the charges dropped. She claimed mental stress, blamed hormone imbalances, and even tried to argue that HOA presidents had qualified immunity. None of it worked. Michael had built an airtight case, not just the videos from that day, but a pattern of harassment he'd uncovered. Turns out we weren't her first victims. Other neighbors came forward with their own stories and evidence. The trial was almost anticlimactic. Karen took a plea deal rather than face a jury of her peers who all lived in neighborhoods and understood the special kind of hell and out-of-control HOA president could create. The judge wasn't sympathetic. Mrs. Henderson, he said, looking over his glasses at her, you abused a position of minor authority to terrorize your neighbors and destroy property. This court sentences you to 18 months probation, 40 hours of community service, and restitution of $4,300. You are also barred from serving on any homeowners association board for 5 years. The gavel came down with a satisfying thud. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air, her face cycling through shades of red and purple as the reality sank in. "That's not fair," she finally managed to whisper, her voice cracking as tears began to roll down her cheeks.